I just have to say it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce two very important people in the state of Texas, the Honorable Joe Strauss, Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives from 2009 to 2019, and Dr. Umair Shah, who is the Executive Director for the Harris County Public Health Department. And so let me just give a little bit of background on both these two gentlemen. Speaker Joe Strauss, the Honorable Joe Strauss, served as Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives from 2009 to 2019. He was the first Speaker of the House from San Antonio in a century and was the longest serving Republican Speaker in Texas history. Speaker Strauss has been widely praised for his focus on core responsibilities of government, such as public education and infrastructure, and his constructive governing style. In 2017, the Dallas Morning News named him Texan of the Year for his courageous stand against harmful and discriminatory legislation. He is the chairman of the Texas Forever Forward Political Action Committee and serves on the Board of Trustees of the Brookings Institution. And moderating our conversation with Speaker Strauss is Dr. Umair Shah, who is the Executive Director and Local Health Authority for Harris County Public Health and has served in this capacity since 2013. And I know we only have a few more days left with Dr. Shah, so we're so lucky to have him. Dr. Shah started his formal public health journey as Chief Medical Officer at Galveston County's Health District before joining Harris County Public Health to oversee its clinical health system and infectious disease portfolio. Under his leadership, Harris County Public Health has won numerous national awards, including recognition as Local Health Department of the Year from the National Association of County and City Health Officials in 2016. He previously served as president of NACHO and its Texas affiliate, representing the nation's nearly 3,000 local health departments. And over his career, Dr. Shah has been a clinician, an innovator, an educator, and a leader in health. And we wanted to bring both of these two individuals together because of their leadership in Texas, because of their expertise in their respective fields. And so we just wanted to have a conversation with them about public health, the state of Texas, and what we all need to be doing moving forward into the next legislative session. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Shah to start the conversation. And thank you both for joining.
Thank you, Rekha, for your support and your leadership throughout immunization-related issues, and certainly want to thank the Immunization Partnership and all of you for joining us. I'm very proud to be a part of this group, and I'm also bittersweet right now. I've been shedding a lot of tears. For those who don't know, Speaker Strauss, I am stepping down as my role as the Harris County Public Health Director. Next Friday is my last day on the 21st. So I'm giving myself a long 2-day vacation. I'm starting as the Secretary of Health in the state of Washington under Governor Jay Inslee, and it's an incredible honor to be joining his cabinet. And so I'm very sad to leave almost 25 years here in Texas, and certainly being at the department for nearly 17 years through thick and thin. And so I'm just really sad to go. So I won't cry this time. So Speaker Strauss, this is not what I'm going to do. And but I'm really excited about being able to moderate this discussion with you. And Rekha has already introduced you, and it's an incredible honor. I know I've met you once before, and you've always been a supporter of really immunizations and health. And I just want to thank you for your continued, not just leadership, but previously in your roles in the legislature, but certainly beyond. I want to just say thank you for everything you continue to do for Texans across our great state. So yeah, I've been asked to moderate, and I've got a few things. And what I wanted to start by saying is that our state's health is really very much about health and healthcare together. And I know we're joining a lot of folks here who are vaccine advocates. And obviously this global pandemic shows the critical nature of public health and how it plays into responding to these kinds of crises. So I've got a few questions for you, Speaker Straus. Before I do that, let me open it up to you if you wanted to make an opening comment and just a welcome to everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shah. Our Texas and Houston, Harris County's loss is Washington State's gain. So congratulations to you. That is a fantastic opportunity you have, and I know you'll do as well for the citizens of the state of Washington as you have for those in Harris County. So my thanks to you for the good work you've done, and best wishes to you in the future. Now, if you find that it rains every day and there's never any sunshine in Washington, the door will always be open to you to come right back. So I doubt we'll see you anytime soon, but we hope to at some point in the future. And so I just want to thank you for all your contributions and all you're doing all the way to the very end. I hope you enjoy your 2 days of vacation. And to this distinguished, committed group of people, I'm really honored to be with you this morning. You all are the ones that are doing the heroic, important work right now, and will be counted on even more as this vaccine becomes available and distributed. But there are in Texas about 29 million people who are counting on you. So again, it's a real honor to be with you this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And when I'm seeing that you're going to be our next governor, then I will certainly be ready to come back as your commissioner of health. So thank you for those kind words. So Speaker Straus, if it's okay, let's just jump right in. And you know, I've got a few questions that I wanted to ask of you, and really it's on everybody's mind, and you're the perfect person to answer this first question. We're just a few weeks away from the start of the new year, and obviously we've got holidays and all sorts of other things that are happening in between. But right after that, we've got a new session for the Texas Legislature, and we know that that is going to be completely different than how it's ever been anywhere in the globe right now. Everything is going to be very different. How do you expect the legislature to respond to the pandemic when it comes back in early 21? And how do you see that as playing into really safety measures at the legislature, but just beyond, really thinking and deliberating about issues that we've learned during the pandemic and beyond?
Yeah, well, that is the key question. And obviously, just in everyone's personal lives and business lives, the pandemic is going to shape everything that the legislature always traditionally addresses, and much more. I was in a conversation yesterday with another group who was really wanting to get into the nuts and bolts of the operation of the legislature, just how they're going to do their business. Will the public have access to the lawmakers as they normally do? Will there be interaction? Will the legislature use this pandemic as a reason to not do very much? And so a lot of rules and procedures are being debated right now. But it occurred to me that this would be the perfect time for the legislature to take a really quick but thorough look at the operations and come up with some bold ideas, some new ways of doing business that won't limit the work that they're about to do or limit the ability of citizens to testify, for citizens to interact and communicate with the legislators who are only there 140 days every other year. Every day in the newspaper you read about, or in the news, you read about some major tech titan from California moving to Austin or Houston or Dallas or San Antonio or somewhere in the state. And it just occurs to me that this might be a time to maybe lean on some of those brilliant minds or some of our homegrown innovators to come up with some ways that will prevent the legislature from at the end of the session saying, gosh, I'm so sorry we couldn't get to this issue or that issue because we just didn't have the ability to. So I hope that there can be some innovative approaches that can be developed here in the very near term. But there's no question the pandemic is going to shape everything that will be on the legislature's plate, and beginning, I think, with the impact that it will have on the state's budget. Employment and economic activity are down. The Comptroller Hager addressed the Legislative Budget Board about a week ago, and he gave some relatively good news, meaning that in the current 2-year cycle that we're in right now, the shortfall, instead of having a surplus as he predicted under, predictably normal times, we're now facing somewhere close to a $5 billion shortfall. It isn't as bad as he said it would be back in the summer, but and manageable to get through this 2-year period. But what he didn't address is how are they going to put together the next 2-year budget, and what will that look like when they come back in early January. So it's going to have a big impact, and I think putting together a budget that meets the basic needs of Texans, at least, is going to be a huge challenge. And beyond that, I think there are new challenges in a lot of areas, but particularly in public education. We have over 5 million kids in our public schools. How do we make up for the lost time that they've had in the classroom over this past close to a year now? The early reports on what our kids are learning and how they're advancing are not good, and that when they go from school year to school year without the normal interaction in the classroom with other kids and with their teachers, this is a serious problem, a serious issue. On school finance, which the legislature did a really fantastic job addressing last session, making a real stride forward. How schools are funded currently is based on average daily attendance. Is that going to continue, or are they going to find another way to make our school districts whole based on enrollment instead of kids in the seats? I know that independent school districts right now are very, very concerned about their funding currently. Where is Texas going to go in the future in terms of virtual schooling? I mean, I think the trend is inevitable and was anyway, that most of us in our jobs and in our schools are going to have more access to technology and more opportunities to learn remotely. We have a big issue of the digital divide that's getting a lot of attention right now, where many families and many students either don't have access or they can't afford broadband service. And we've all read stories about school districts, schools having to equip buses as hotspots, or families having to go to a McDonald's parking lot in order to complete their homework. So the whole issue about connecting everyone digitally, I think, is going to be an important topic. And still on public education, the issue of testing, standardized testing, in a time that we're going through right now, I think is going to get a lot of attention as well. Should our standardized tests even be given this year? And if so, should they be used as an assessment tool or as an instrument against some of the schools that may not and probably will not perform very well? So there's a lot out there that legislature is going to have to think about. And then there's the issues that you all are so important in, and that's dealing with the vaccine as it's coming available. And how is the population going to be prioritized? The logistics of distributing the vaccine. I think you're group is going to have major input. I hope you have major input into those issues as well. And something that should have been worried about more than I think it was is just how robust is our public health system in Texas. My guess is not very robust. My guess also is that Harris County is probably ahead of the curve in Texas on that score, and that's a good thing for people who live in your community. But it's a big state, and a lot of people, I think, may very easily fall through the cracks. And I think also something that that I've been speaking out about lately is I think there should be a really serious discussion about the state of Texas accessing more federal dollars for healthcare. I'm not sure it'll happen, but there ought to be a conversation about accessing more federal funds that would be available to us. The last time I checked, about 700,000 Texans have lost their insurance coverage because they've either lost their jobs or they've lost their businesses that were connected to some kind of health coverage. That is a huge problem, and I think the big question hanging over all of this is what is the right balance between protecting public safety and public health and keeping our economy as open as possible to generate the economic activity that leads to jobs and to revenue for public services. So there's a lot on their plate, and I think that the legislature also has some role to play, and I'm sure your organization will encourage this, in encouraging Texans to take advantage of the vaccine when it's available. There's some pretty troubling numbers out there about people being hesitant to take the vaccine even when it's available to them wherever they wind up in the pecking order. So I'm hoping that the legislature will be responsible as they address the vaccine as it becomes available. So it really, and that's only a partial list of the things that they're going to have to deal with. And again, going back to the first point I made, I hope that the pandemic isn't used as an excuse to not address these issues and others.
Speaker Straus, that I think you covered a lot. In fact, you covered a couple of my questions, and that's excellent. I did want to ask you a follow-up question, which is really about, this is the first time the legislature is going to be meeting in the midst of the pandemic. And so it is also the first time it'll have an opportunity to discuss the management of the pandemic in the state of Texas, whether at the state level or in, vis-a-vis the locals. How do you expect the legislature to see how the pandemic has been handled here in Texas, and what some of those lessons can be applied, as you mentioned, even in the road to vaccines and maybe the light at the end of a very, very long tunnel? How do you see the legislature looking at the state of how we've done it? Have we done it well? And number two, what is the road ahead?
Well, Dr. Shah, you'd be a more qualified person to answer that question than I am. But from what I've seen, obviously it's been a very difficult time for decision makers and for policy makers. And I hesitate to be too critical because I don't envy the positions that they're in, having to make some very tough calls. But having said that, the local officials, the county judges in particular, and some mayors have had to make some difficult choices. And I don't know that the state leadership has made their job any easier on occasion. And I know at the very beginning of this pandemic, it was extremely bumpy and rocky and uneven, and not very inspiring as a citizen to watch. I hope that gets better. I hope it's gotten better. I still think there's some friction out there that's unfortunate. But I hope our response at the state level, and especially when the legislature comes back in, is shaped by good science, and it's shaped by what's in the best interest of the public, and doesn't get caught up in the political whims of one party or another, or some ideology that essentially is anti-science. So I think in some of the decisions that seem to have been made to this point seem to have been responsive to some of the unfortunate noise from political groups, rather than listening to good science. And I just think this is too serious of an issue. Obviously, lives and livelihoods are at stake, to leave up to political and ideology. So that too often, that's unfortunately where we've been. So what I hope we see is obviously a good nod to science, and also a rededication to local and state leaders trying to find ways to cooperate, not to be at cross purposes. And so anything that can be done to encourage that is what we all ought to be working toward. And again, these local decision makers have had to make some really tough calls, and they've had to really bear the brunt of this pandemic in their communities. I just think it's always better when state and local officials are working together, and never is it more important than during a crisis such as this one.
You've always been a champion of staying above the fray, or getting past the divisiveness, regardless of who's causing it. And I think that kind of spirit is what we need more than ever in this country, is just saying it's not red or blue, it's not left or right, it's all of us, and the enemy is the virus, the enemy is not each other. And I think that's the biggest challenge. The other thing I wanted to point out is that over the years we've talked about, at least we talked about in our health department, about the importance of investing in health, true health, public health, but health, not just healthcare delivery. I think this pandemic has shown us, I think you had made a very good point about the patchwork of public health systems at the local level across our state. Some are very strong, incredible, passionate, incredible leaders, staff members who work day and night, 24/7 for months and months. But the challenge is that not everywhere, while everybody's passionate, not everywhere are they invested in. And that's a real issue, especially when we think about immunizations as being a key hot topic for the future, not just for flu and measles vaccine, but now for COVID vaccine. And here we are, and you have those very public health systems that are tasked and taxed at the same time with the road ahead, and yet they're also not invested in over the years, and now they're fatigued because of a 11-month response.
Yeah, no, that's right, and that's the point I tried to make about, and look, I'm guilty of it as well, because I was part of the problem for a long time. But it takes, unfortunately, it may take a crisis or a pandemic or epidemic to get the attention of policymakers to raise the level of focus and priority on our public health system and the infrastructure that goes with that, so that it's in place the next time something like this happens, as inevitably it will. There was the Ebola thing in Texas a few years ago. We kind of perked up a little bit about that, but then it receded, and it seemed to be handled well. And then we kind of went back about our business, hoping that something like this wouldn't happen, but it has. And so I think on a federal level in particular, but at a state level as well, we need to really strengthen and shore up the infrastructure for public health.
Recently, you had said you'd come out in favor of Medicaid expansion. Do you see that as a potential with a transformative legislative viewpoint of, hey, we're in the middle of a pandemic and all hands on deck, and we've got to bring as many resources into our state? What are your thoughts about the chances of something like that happening?
Well, before I get into the chances of it, whether it's called expanding Medicaid, or whether you call it the Texas plan, or you call it whatever the idea is that they can rally around, it's been a source of frustration for me for many years now. We tried in the legislature, in the House when I was there, to find a way to access more federal funds to do something about getting more Texans covered. We weren't successful. But what's really been frustrating to me is that for a long time now, the state of Texas, in terms of federal assistance, has relied on short-term measures, on so-called waivers that grant some temporary funding in certain complicated ways. But there hasn't been a strategic plan. There hasn't even been a strategic thought process to how Texas can do a better job of covering more people. As I said earlier, was it 700,000 people have lost their insurance? We already were at the very bottom of the states in terms of having lives covered by insurance. It's only gotten much worse right now. So, it's been resisted. This whole topic's been resisted for many years, whether it be under a Republican administration in Washington or a Democrat administration. It just has been, I think, willfully ignored by those in state leadership. So nothing's really changed. We have still the highest rate of uninsured, worse now, and we still have people seeking care in our emergency rooms, which doesn't do anything other than just raise people's property taxes and taxes our overall health system. Our public hospitals have their hands full with this. And so I just think there has to be a better way. There has to, at some point, be an acknowledgement that this is a business decision for the state of Texas. And, when you get a 90-10 match that's available, that sounds like a pretty good deal to me. And I know there are ways to put guardrails on it that some of the more conservative thinkers rightfully should worry about. Allowing costs to get out of control has to be considered. So, it just doesn't make sense to me, however, that states that are Republican conservative states like Missouri, like Idaho, like Oklahoma next door, and some others have found a way, Arkansas, have found their own ways to access more federal funds in a way that works for their state. So the absence of having a strategic plan, to me, continues to be frustrating. Now, to answer your question about whether this is possible or not, and whether the state leaders are going to be receptive to it, I don't know. But it sure seems to me that this is a problem that's not going away. It's only gotten worse, and it's not a new challenge. But it's more acute now during this pandemic, and I think the time is now for this to be a very important and high-profile discussion that leads to something other than another 10 years of nothing but short-term, patchwork funding solutions.
Thank you for that. So I have one final quick question for you, which I'm sure is going to have once I ask it, it's a nuanced, long answer because it's a multifaceted question. And then I'll turn it over to Rekha for just a few minutes. There were a couple questions that came in the chat. And Rekha, I think you may want to, if we've got time, Representative Strauss, if you've got just a few more minutes, we'd love to be able to ask a couple of the chat questions.
Sure.
The final question that I had for you was advice for this group. Advocacy is such an important area, but it's also very difficult at times, and nobody really figures out how you do it well until you've either done it or you failed miserably and you're like, well, that wasn't the way. What kind of advice would you give to this group as we continue to have discussions around the importance of health, the importance of vaccination, the importance of immunizations, et cetera, and as we move into engaging with lawmakers in a very different type of legislative session that's ahead?
Well, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is, if you haven't already started to engage with your local legislator, do it today. Start early. Don't wait until the session gets underway and they get, sequestered and they get pulled in 1,000 different directions. So start early. And legislators, as I heard the young lady talking before our panel began, it's not that difficult. You can engage lawmakers. She was talking to congressmen who represent over 1 million people, but she got through. Everyone can get through to their local House member, for instance. They only represent about 20% of the number of people that U.S. congressmen represent. So, and they do want to hear from you. So engage with them early. Don't wait till the session starts. Call them. Organize social media campaigns. I don't mean like formal campaigns, but just organically put together social media interactions with your local legislators. I promise you, they want to know what the concerns are that motivate their voters and their constituents. They don't want to find out the hard way. And the good legislators keep an eye on that. And you can be enormously impactful, much more so than you think, as individuals. And as an organization, that helps a lot too. So my real advice is to make some noise. And we all know with the vaccine coming that there are small, I hope small, pockets of anti-vaxxers and anti-science voices out there, and they get a lot of attention, a lot more attention than the numbers would warrant, I think. So it's really important to be organized and to be vigilant and to be consistent in your communication with lawmakers. So start now and keep it up.
Well, thank you for that. And just for the record, I'll still be a resident of the state for a while. And so feel free to call on me as I transition. I'll be going back and forth for several months until my family transitions. So Representative Straus, I will take you up on the offer. I was hoping that I was going to be able to provide some insights into this legislative session. Obviously, that won't be possible, or I'll be doing it in the state of Washington. Their legislative session also starts January 11th. So, but I'm here, and I really want to thank you for not just this conversation, but your continued common sense approach to partnership and to working across everyone to work together for the betterment of our communities. And thank you, because that is such a breath of fresh air in a sea of just so many, on both sides, by the way, both sides, just folks that just dig at each other. Unfortunately, who loses are our community members. And thank you for that. Reka, if I could turn it to you, I know we have just a few minutes left, but do you want to just see if there are a couple of questions in the chat that you might want to raise?
Sure. And before we do that, again, thank you to both of you for such a powerful and insightful conversation. And I do want to acknowledge, we do have a question in the chat, and the two questions are somewhat related. And it catapults on the last question you asked, Dr. Shah, to the speaker. And this is actually for both of you. The question is, after Hurricane Harvey, there was a lot of opportunity to debrief with the legislature to kind of plan around emergency response and think about policies and future planning. And so additionally, we're asking for advice. What should vaccine advocates like we have on the line and the Immunization Partnership focus on as a plan when it comes to future vaccine advocacy? So in other words, everyone has COVID top of mind, but we also know sometimes memories are short. So if you have a couple of points that you can share with us in terms of what we should be focusing on and messaging to our lawmakers while we're still actively thinking about this pandemic, and more importantly, vaccine preparedness and then post-pandemic response.
Representative Strauss, I'll turn it to you.
I think I've pretty much covered the ground on that from my point of view as a non-scientist. Dr. Shah, you went to Vanderbilt, correct?
I did.
Yeah, well, after me, I did not take science courses. I was not on the pre-med path. I was taking remedial political courses. But
I think you did fairly well there, my friend.
so I think you probably could address the science side of this, but I do think it's important, having been a legislator who's not a scientist, that you can help educate them with the research that you all do and have access to, and the credibility that you bring with your voice to help educate legislators so they're not led astray or tempted by some of the more hysterical opposing voices on this vaccination issue. So I do think you have a really valuable role to play. You have credibility, you have science on your side, and I think that again, I would just encourage you to start now and do everything you can to counter the other side. As I said earlier, they are going to be active. They have a lot of energy, and I think that you can overwhelm them with facts and with science, but you need to be vigilant and you need to be constant.
What I would add to what Representative Strauss just said is, and by the way, I started off molecular biology at Vanderbilt, and I actually shifted to philosophy, and to the chagrin and actually to the complete shock of my parents. It wasn't until graduation when they found out that I wasn't getting a bachelor in science, it was a bachelor of arts. So and one thing that I would just say is that actually encapsulates what we need to do, is that we need to start with the science. That's the molecular biology piece of my life. We need to start with the science, but we can't stop at the science. We have to be incredibly gifted at engagement, and gifted at the narrative, and gifted at telling a story. And if we just stay with the science, we miss out on the opportunity to engage those same legislators who, by the way, are getting some very heartfelt stories and a lot of pressure from others who oppose that science view. And so it's really about science is necessary but not sufficient. And we've got to be better at taking the white coat off and be able to be human beings and connect with people and tell our stories and be able to explain to people why what we're saying is important, and why what we're saying is actually going to help our fellow Texans, our communities. So that's the only thing I would add to what Representative Strauss said. And I'm glad to know that we have two Vanderbilt alums here who are, they both were able to get through the remedial part of the college.